Have you ever sat in a room full of silence and still couldn't hear peace? The world was quiet, but your mind was louder than ever. That's not your fault. It's just untrained. We live in a world that rewards reaction, not reflection. A world that teaches us how to use devices, but not how to use thought. You've been taught how to perform, but never how to pause. How to plan, but not how to be present. So your mind runs fast, chaotic, and noisy. And most people will live their entire lives this way, in mental chaos that looks like productivity, but feels like exhaustion. But the mind is not the enemy. It is a tool, a temple, a weapon if trained. And that training begins not with force but with discipline. Today, I will share with you how to begin that path, not with motivation, but with understanding. Not by changing your life overnight, but by learning how to change one moment, and then mastering the next. Because when you discipline your mind, the world outside starts to make sense. But when your mind is untrained, even the quietest room feels loud. When your mind is untrained, even the quietest room feels loud. That is because an untrained mind doesn't need noise outside. It generates noise within. Thoughts jump from one fear to another. Memories resurface without invitation. And the moment you try to sit still, your mind rebels like a wild animal trapped in a cage. You don't need external distractions. Your mind becomes the distraction. But that's not a weakness. It's simply untrained potential. A powerful engine running wild doesn't make it broken. It means it hasn't been guided, channeled, or shaped. The truth is, your mind is much like a wild horse. It's beautiful, full of power, but unpredictable, uncontrollable, and sometimes even dangerous when it's left alone. And no matter how intelligent or capable you are, if your mind is not under discipline, it will drag you wherever it wants, whenever it wants. You might have experienced this already. When you're trying to focus and your thoughts wander to something someone said last week. When you want to listen, but your emotions get in the way. When you promise yourself you won't overthink tonight, but the silence invites every shadow of fear. That's the work of an untrained mind. It doesn't respect your intentions because it's never been taught to. It's not loyal to your goals because it doesn't recognize them as commands. The truth is, discipline isn't about forcing your mind into silence. It's about building a relationship with it. You don't control a wild horse by shouting. You do it by presence, patience, and training over time. The more you run from your mind, the more power you give it. The more you sit with it, the more it begins to understand your language. We've been taught how to train muscles, how to sharpen skills, even how to speak with confidence, but very few have been shown how to train the mind. Not through books, not through information, but through lived experience. And that experience begins the moment you stop trying to fight your thoughts and start learning how to observe them. Because observation is the beginning of mastery. What you can't see, you can't change. And when your mind is left unobserved, it becomes the master of you. But the moment you begin to see clearly, not just what you're thinking, but why you're thinking it, you begin to take your power back. Slowly, gently, and with consistency, your mind begins to respond. Like that wild horse that once refused to listen, it starts to slow its pace when you are near. Not because you threatened it, but because you showed up with presence. That's the first step in training. Presence. Not perfection, not performance. Just the willingness to sit with the discomfort, to face the noise, and to remain still when your instinct is to run. Most people run from their mind because they believe it is too chaotic. But the chaos is just the surface. Beneath it lies stillness, but you'll never reach it unless you're willing to stay, to watch, to train, and to return to that space again and again until silence becomes your ally and your mind becomes your companion. When silence becomes your ally and your mind becomes your companion, something inside you begins to shift. You start to notice the weight of the world doesn't come from the world itself. It comes from how your mind reacts to it. The external chaos only becomes internal suffering when your inner landscape isn't prepared. And the truth is, most people are not prepared, not because they lack intelligence, but because they've been conditioned to react instead of reflect. From the moment we open our eyes in the morning, we're pulled into a cycle of notifications, obligations, distractions, and noise. We respond to messages, we scroll endlessly, we chase tasks that give us a sense of urgency, but no real clarity. This is how modern life operates. It rewards the fast thinker, not the wise one. It glorifies speed over stillness, noise over depth, movement over meaning. And in this race, we've lost something sacred. We've forgotten how to return to ourselves. A reactive mind cannot be present. It's always looking for something to fix, something to fear, something to anticipate. It cannot rest in the now because the now feels unfamiliar. Reflection, on the other hand, is not passive. It is the deepest form of action. It is the choice to pause before responding, to breathe before reacting, to see things as they are rather than through the filter of fear or urgency. But this is not taught in schools, nor in society. We're taught how to compete, how to compare, how to consume, but not how to center ourselves. We've mastered external tools, but we've abandoned the internal compass. This imbalance creates mental fatigue. It's why you feel tired even when you haven't done much. Why your thoughts loop in cycles you can't explain. Why peace feels temporary and pressure feels permanent. It's not because you're broken. It's because your mind is functioning on a loop of reaction, not a rhythm of reflection. That's why silence feels uncomfortable at first. It exposes what you've ignored. And the more you train your mind, the more you start to realize how unnatural constant reaction really is. You begin to crave stillness, not escape it. You begin to understand that true intelligence isn't how fast you speak, it's how deeply you listen. Not just to others, but to your own inner dialogue. And when you observe your own reactions, something sacred happens. You create space between the stimulus and your response. And in that space, you find your freedom, the freedom to choose differently, the freedom to not let a fleeting emotion define your entire day, the freedom to return to your breath, your center, your awareness. This is what makes reflection powerful. It slows down time, not in the world, but in your mind. And when your mind slows, it begins to see what it used to miss. You no longer just survive moments, you witness them. You no longer just react, you respond with purpose. You no longer just move, you move with awareness, and that awareness is the beginning of true discipline. When awareness becomes the center of your movement, discipline stops being a punishment and starts becoming a path. We often mistake discipline as something harsh, something that restricts freedom or eliminates joy. But that misunderstanding only exists because we've seen discipline as external enforcement, not internal alignment. Real discipline is not about forcing yourself to do what you hate. It's about aligning yourself with what you value so deeply that distractions no longer have the same power. It's the steady hand that chooses direction even when emotion pulls in another way. It's the quiet strength that reminds you who you are when the noise outside wants you to forget. And yet, discipline doesn't shout. It doesn't arrive with intensity or pressure. It arrives in small choices, repeated in silence. It begins when you notice your mind drifting and gently guide it back. It begins when you resist the urge to escape discomfort and choose instead to stay with it. It begins when you realize you have a say in how you spend your focus, your energy, your breath. That realization alone is liberating, because it means you are not a victim of your patterns, you are the one who can reshape them. But to reshape anything, you must first return to structure, and structure isn't a cage, it's a container, a space that holds you steady while the world tries to pull you in every direction. Without structure, even the strongest willpower fades, even the clearest vision blurs. So discipline builds that structure, not with force, but with rhythm. You wake up, not because the world demands it, but because your purpose does. You sit in silence, not because you're avoiding noise, but because you're mastering your reaction to it. You repeat rituals, not to impress anyone, but to remind yourself what matters. And the more you honor those small, consistent acts, the more stable your inner world becomes. Chaos may still exist around you, but within you, a rhythm begins to grow. A rhythm that isn't shaken by temporary feelings. A rhythm that knows how to return even after you fall off course. That's what discipline truly is. It's not perfection. It's the power to return, to reset, to realign. Again and again with gentleness, not judgment. This is why discipline is liberation, because it sets you free from the habits that keep you small. It releases you from the reactions that once defined you. It becomes a sacred agreement between who you've been and who you're becoming, and that agreement is honored not once in a grand gesture, but daily in quiet repetitions. Every time you choose stillness over distraction, presence over impulse, patience over reaction, you are disciplining your mind. You are shaping it, not into something new, but into what it was always capable of being. And that shaping is not rigid, it is alive. It grows with you, it deepens with you, and the more you give yourself to it, the more you realize discipline was never a weight. It was a doorway into power, into clarity, into freedom. When discipline reveals itself as a doorway, what lies beyond it is not noise or ambition. It is silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of stillness, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty but full of presence, full of awareness, full of clarity. And yet, silence is often the most difficult space to enter because it confronts us with ourselves. Most people are not afraid of quiet. They're afraid of what quiet reveals. Without the distractions of noise and movement, the mind begins to speak, and when it speaks, it often brings things we've buried, avoided, or ignored. But this is why silence is the first true teacher of discipline. It doesn't teach through explanation. It teaches through exposure. It shows you the state of your inner world with honesty that no external voice can offer. It is not always comfortable, but it is always true. In silence, your thoughts stop hiding behind words. Your habits become visible. Your patterns become loud, and you begin to see how much of your life has been reactive, automatic, unexamined. But this awareness is not a punishment. It's a gift, because you cannot change what you do not first recognize. And silence creates the space where recognition is possible. It gives you the distance to observe your thoughts without becoming them, to watch your emotions rise and fall without getting swept away by them. It teaches you that you are not your thoughts, not your feelings. You are the awareness behind them. And once you experience that, even for a moment, you begin to understand power in a new way. Power is not loud. It is not about control over others. It is the ability to remain unmoved in the presence of chaos, the ability to witness your own mind without judgment, the ability to choose stillness when your impulses beg for reaction, and this ability is cultivated in silence. It is there, in the quiet, that your discipline deepens, because silence is a mirror. It reflects your habits, your beliefs, your truth. And if you can sit in that reflection without turning away, you begin to develop an inner stability that cannot be shaken by noise, by criticism, by fear. That stability becomes your foundation. You stop seeking validation from outside because you've already met yourself on the inside. You stop chasing clarity from others because you've found a place within you that already knows. This is why the path of mental discipline must pass through silence. Because without silence, discipline becomes performance. It becomes routine without reflection. But when you allow silence to become part of your daily rhythm, discipline transforms into devotion. A devotion to truth. A devotion to presence. A devotion to becoming the kind of person who can stand still in the middle of pressure and choose response over reaction. That strength is not visible on the surface, but it is deeply felt. It radiates through your actions, your words, your presence, and the more time you spend in silence, the more it begins to follow you. Into conversations, into decisions, into everything. You carry it like a hidden center. And people may not know what has changed in you, but they will feel it, because silence doesn't just teach discipline, it embodies it. When silence begins to follow you, when it walks with you into rooms filled with noise, into moments charged with tension, it becomes more than a practice, it becomes a presence. And it is within this presence that rituals take shape, not grand ceremonial performances, but simple, quiet repetitions that slowly shape your reality from the inside out. These are not rituals for the sake of routine, but for the sake of return. Because in a world that constantly pulls your attention outward, rituals become the threads that pull you back inward. And it is through these small acts, repeated with awareness, that your mind learns discipline in its most natural form. The mind does not change through force. It changes through familiarity. When you repeat something often enough, it becomes a path, not because it is the fastest way forward, but because it becomes the way you no longer have to fight to follow. You no longer need willpower to sit in silence if silence has become part of you. You no longer struggle to breathe with awareness if breath has become your anchor. This is the power of ritual. It reduces resistance, and in doing so, it creates rhythm, and rhythm is what the mind learns best. Chaos may be exciting, but rhythm is sustainable. And if you want your discipline to last, you must build it on something deeper than motivation. You must build it on movement that repeats itself until it becomes who you are. This is why small, mindful rituals matter more than big, dramatic decisions. You do not need to change your entire life in one day. You need to return to your breath each morning. You need to choose stillness for a few moments before the world begins to speak. You need to sit in silence not to escape life, but to prepare for it. You need to speak slowly, move intentionally, and listen fully, not because it looks impressive, but because it builds the inner space where wisdom can land. And over time, your mind learns. It learns that it is safe to slow down, that not every thought needs a reaction, that not every moment needs to be filled. It learns that peace isn't something you chase, it's something you return to. Every ritual you honor teaches your mind something. When you wake up early to sit in stillness, your mind learns to value presence over urgency. When you resist distraction and stay with your breath, your mind learns to choose awareness over escape. When you repeat these acts, not perfectly, but consistently, You are training your mind without force, without punishment, but with devotion. And the more devoted you are to these small actions, the more powerful they become. Not because they change the world around you immediately, but because they change how you meet it. Your presence sharpens, your clarity deepens, your reactions slow, and the same world that once felt overwhelming begins to respond to you differently. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. And all of that begins with the rituals you choose to repeat. Not once, but daily, until they no longer feel like practices and begin to feel like parts of your nature. When something becomes part of your nature, it no longer requires effort, it becomes expression. The way you breathe, the way you listen, the way you respond, all begin to reflect the quiet discipline you've cultivated. But at the center of all of this, there is one ability that must be trained more than any other. One power that determines whether your rituals remain alive or fade into habit. That power is your attention. Because everything you've built, everything you've practiced, everything you've refined, lives or dies in the space where your attention lands. And if you cannot master your attention, the world will master it for you. Attention is the most valuable currency of the mind. Where it goes, your energy follows. Where it stays, your transformation begins. But attention is also fragile. In a world designed to distract, your attention is constantly under attack by flashing screens, shallow conversations, unresolved emotions, and unconscious habits. And over time, this constant scattering of your focus weakens your ability to be present. You begin to live in fragments. You're in one place, but thinking of another. You hear words, but you don't truly listen. You complete tasks, but you feel disconnected from them. Life becomes a blur, not because you're moving too fast, but because your attention is moving without direction. And this is where training begins. Not with control, but with observation. You cannot direct attention until you understand where it escapes. Until you sit long enough to see what steals it. Sometimes it's anxiety. Sometimes it's boredom. Sometimes it's unresolved emotions or unfinished thoughts. But until you become conscious of what pulls your attention away, you won't be able to reclaim it. This is why silence and ritual matter. They reveal your distractions, not to shame you, but to invite you to choose differently. And every time you gently guide your attention back, to your breath, to your task, to the present, you are not failing, you are training. That repetition is the very essence of mental discipline. Attention is not about force, it's about consistency. It's about remembering, again and again, what matters. And in that remembering, you start to rewire your presence. You begin to notice details you used to miss. You begin to engage with your own thoughts rather than escape from them. You begin to give your full presence to what's in front of you. Not because it demands it, but because it deserves it. And slowly, your attention becomes anchored. It no longer drifts so easily. It begins to return on its own, without resistance, without delay. And that return, over time, becomes a kind of quiet strength, a stability that doesn't need to announce itself, but is felt in every conversation, every movement, every pause. People will sense it, not through your words, but through your presence, because trained attention radiates. It doesn't have to prove itself. It simply stays, it listens, it sees, and in that still presence the mind finds its center. Not in resistance, but in rhythm. Not in control, but in calm. And once your attention becomes rooted, everything else follows. Clarity, insight, peace, not as goals to chase, but as companions to walk with. Discipline does not begin in grand declarations. It begins in the stillness you are willing to return to, The untrained mind seeks control through chaos, but the trained mind learns presence through practice. What you have explored is not just a method, it is a way of being. You've seen how the mind resists silence, how it reacts instead of reflects, and how it can be softened, not with force, but with consistency. You've learned that rituals shape your inner world, not because they are big, but because they are repeated. That attention is the gateway, the anchor, the compass. And when you train your attention, you shape the entire structure of your life. Not overnight, but breath by breath. This path is not reserved for monks in the mountains. It is for anyone brave enough to meet themselves with honesty. Discipline is not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming fully yourself, calm, clear, focused, and free. You don't need to wait for the perfect moment to begin. The moment is already here. The mind will wander. The world will pull. But you now know how to return. And in that return, again and again, you become the master of your inner world.